reminded me, there we go, start the recording for the Zoom meeting. So if you need to step out at any point, don't be concerned that you're going to miss the presentation because we will have it recorded. And so you'll be able to access it later. And also if you need to leave at any point, you will also be able to access it later. So don't worry about that. I apologize. I'm going to be letting people in as I finish this introduction here. So I apologize if I seem just a little distracted. So a couple things, just protocol things, because this is a Zoom meeting that we wanted to go through. There's quite a few people, thankfully, that have been able to make it tonight. And we want to make sure your questions get answered, but we want to make it easy to track those questions and make sure folks aren't talking over each other. So what we are asking is that you put your questions in the chat. And Nordic has made it clear that they really, we may have folks from all over at the meeting tonight. It is one of the advantages of Zoom, but the Nordic representatives really want to prioritize the questions from residents and stakeholders in Humboldt County. So what we're asking with those questions is if you have questions and you put them in the chat, the request is that you put your name. If you're not named already, and Zoom can do that for a lot of folks, but if you are not named, if you wouldn't mind naming yourself, telling us your location, so the community that you live in, if it's a city proper, or if you're living in one of the outlying communities, if you wouldn't mind putting that in with your question as well. We'd appreciate that. Basically, the Nordic folks are going to go through their presentation, and then we'll have time at the end for questions. The other thing too is sometimes people may not want their question addressed publicly. There may be something that comes up, but you would rather have Nordic answer it more directly. I have put my email into the chat, and you are also welcome to get in touch with me directly, and we can follow up with you outside of the meeting, again, if you don't want to share your question in the meeting itself. Oh, somebody just talked. Anyway, like I said, questions, comments, please put them in the chat. I'll try to track that as well as I can. A couple other things, it may be easier just because a lot of this is going to be PowerPoint. There's going to be a lot of graphics and data that you may want to have a good look at. All of these names may be getting in your way. If you are not too familiar with Zoom, you should, if you put your cursor near the top, your mouse near the top, a little bar that says view options should show up. And if you click on that, you can click hide video panel. And then you'll just be seeing the presentation and you won't be seeing everybody's names and that sort of thing. So that may be something that you want to do just so you can more easily see the presentation. I'm looking through here, questions at the end. The other thing is we know with everything going on, that you may know of friends or colleagues that aren't able to make it tonight, and we recognize that. Nordic really wanted to make sure that anyone that wants to learn more about the project can do so, and so there will be follow-up meetings. This just became very unusual circumstances, and so this is not the only time we'll have a community meeting like this. So again, if you need to leave but want to participate live again, or if you know friends and colleagues that are interested in the project, please know that we will have a follow-up meeting, and you can feel free to reach out to me and let me know if you want to be included on that. So with that, Marianne, is there anything that I have forgotten before I turn the program over to you?
Well, I guess if you answer a question and we don't answer it properly, or you have follow-up questions, just resend it with, or take the follow-up question and resend it with the original question so we can go back to it and address it once we go through all the questions. So we will try our utmost to answer any question. It is a little different format than we're used to. We've had several Zoom meetings now, but still we kind of lack some of the interaction, but I am pretty sure that we will be able to go through the studies in a good way here online as well. So this is the best we can do, and we're looking forward to being in person.
Marianne, you make some very good points.
Okay.
So my request again is if folks can just stay muted, we would appreciate that, and we'll take all questions through the chat.
Okay.
Thanks
Well,
very much.
I have seen a lot of familiar names here on the list. But I was asked just to say a little bit about Nordic before we start. As you know, we have been we announced the intention of building this project almost a year and a half ago. It goes really fast. And we have met with a lot of stakeholders. We did the due diligence last year and presented it to our investors back in Europe, and got the go-ahead for starting preparations for permit applications. And that's where we're at right now. Nordic is a company that was, well, actually, I'll go through the agenda first.
Marianne, you make some very good points.
Okay, I get some feedback here, but anyways, the agenda for today's meeting is short intro. You will meet our team from Nordic and GHD who's present today. And I'll give you a brief intro about Nordic Aquafarms and the status of the permitting process in Humboldt. And I'll show you some before and after pictures of the proposed site and show the site plan and explain what it is that we're proposing to build, and a presentation of the tentative timeline. And then David we'll go through the studies, and both the dilution study and the marine resources biological evaluation that we have done. And then we'll open up for Q&A. So with me today, Lynette, she started the meeting. I think a lot of you have seen me before too. I'm heading up the commercial part of the company, and also been in charge of the California project and different aspects of that. I am based in Maine. I've spent a lot of time in Humboldt, unfortunately not the last 6 months, but I hope to get back. I say every month that I hope to get back, and soon I'll make it, I hope. I have David with me as well. He will present the studies. He is our Vice President Technology, or CTO, which he can explain more in detail himself what he's doing. But I like to say that he is the link between the fish people and the engineers. But so, and he has a lot of knowledge about the water treatment systems that and the discharge that we will present today. Next one is Scott. Scott is our project manager in Humboldt, based in Humboldt, and probably the one you will see the most going forward, at least until we can start, coming back to Humboldt. He's an HSU graduate and environmental engineer, and is a project manager for the permitting process in Humboldt. Then we have Ed Cotter. He is our Senior Vice President for projects, based out of Maine, but is also contributing to the project in Humboldt, and is our, I would say, our center of expertise for engineering here in the US, basically heading up the function engineering. We have John Hessler. I think a lot of you have met John. He is Scott's predecessor. He's based out of Maine, but spent quite a lot of time in Humboldt and was project manager for the project in the startup phase until Scott started. And then we have Misha Schwartz. He is our, he works for GHD, and same with Andrea. And they are heading up the permitting process from the vendor side for Nordic Aquafarms, and they will also be able to answer questions once we go through it. So just to start with, who's Nordic Aquafarms? We were founded about 7 years ago in Norway, the first large commercial RIS project. Originally, when it was founded, let's see what's happened here. We got the first R&D license to do RAS in Norway back then. Went against the incumbent industry. Norway is quite large, as you know, in salmon production and in net pens. So actually being the initiator or the catalyst for developing RAS facilities in Norway. The idea was to take the fish production out of the ocean and to mitigate some of the issues that you see in net pen production today.
Take that, Trump.
We also have 2 facilities in Denmark. It's a large kingfish facility, and it's also a large marine hatchery. And then we have 2 proposed projects in the US, one in Belfast, Maine, and then in Humboldt, California. Our proposal is to, and I'll show the site plan later, but we have approximately 25,000 metric tons of production in each of these facilities. So I would assume, based on today's consumption in the US, that would account for, if you look at, you know, salmon in general, all types of salmon, that would be about 10% of today's consumption in between those 2 projects. So it's a fairly efficient way of producing fish, considering the 35 acres we have in California and the 50 acres we have in Maine. So that's the whole idea. You take fish production out of the ocean. Traditionally, you do the smolt or the hatcheries on shore or in rivers, and then you put it out in the ocean. We have kept the fish on land. So our fish lives on land indoors from egg to harvest size.
Thank
So
you for doing that. Has the Trump administration?
This is not the same as the projects that have been proposed through the executive orders a little while ago. That was, they go offshore, not in base, etc., like net pens, but further offshore. This is something completely different. So where are we? I mean, building a project like this requires a lot of permitting. And we have worked closely with our landlord, the Harbor District, and the Humboldt County, and other authorities as well in Humboldt. And we agreed with the county that they will be the lead agency. So what permits are we looking at this point locally in Humboldt? We have the NPDES permit. It's a discharge permit that we send the application to the water board. We also send an application to the Coastal Commission for the discharge. That's a coastal development permit. We will do an initial study for the CEQA, and then
Black Lives Matter.
And CEQA to Humboldt County, and then we have the coastal development permit that we will submit to Humboldt County as well, and then air quality permit. In addition to that, we will get aquaculture or egg import permits. That's something that we work with Fish and Wildlife down in Sacramento. It's a different process than actually building the facility on site. We have done a lot of studies. The 2 in green are the ones that we will present today. They are attached to the discharge permit applications that we have submitted. So they are public, and the full reports are accessible for the audience, and we will explain how we can get hold of those if you're interested. We've also done a cultural resource investigation. It has been submitted to the THPOs, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers at the tribes closest to the facility or in surrounding Eureka. And it will also go through a AB 52 consultation. And it will not be made public. That's common practice for those studies. All the other ones listed in black, the biological resource report, noise, botanical, traffic, wetland delineation, asbestos, demolition, seismic, geotech, etc., will be made public once they're completed or once we have submitted the application. So there are a lot of things to go through. A lot of these studies will also be subject to peer review or third-party verifications through the county and when we apply. So it's quite a lot of information, and it's quite a lot of work that goes into developing a site like this, and which we think is a good thing. That we have strict rules and regulations that we need to comply with, and that we need to do this work as well. So we're happy so far. I think it's been despite the challenges with COVID, we have been able to proceed, and we have been able to more or less keep the timeline that we proposed initially. So we will go through the marine resources and dilution analysis in this meeting. This is the site. This is what it looks like today. I guess most of you are familiar with the site. As you can see, it's a huge cleanup job that we have to do. Nordic is doing that. That's part of the agreement and part of our proposal. We have done a demolition study. We have done study of any kind of pollution analysis, and this site will be cleaned up. We're producing a high quality, high grade, high quality food. We need to produce that on a clean site, and it's in our joint interest, both in Humboldt County and Nordic's interest, to make sure that this site is proper for food production. So as part of the project, we need to clean up this site. And once we've done that, these are some early renderings. You'll see it is a fairly large facility, but it's a very efficient footprint that we have designed. And these large houses are actually filled with fish. I'll show you a picture of what the site plan looks like. And this is just a different view of the site. You see, we'll take down the smokestack and the boiler buildings. So when you look at it, the visual impact from Eureka will be actually less than what you see today, despite these buildings being fairly large. This is what this site looks like. This part here, if you see my pointer, will be phase one. This is the hatchery where the fish grow from egg till they are moved or transferred into the grow out sections. We have a perch section and a processing facility. We have a huge wastewater treatment facility, and then we have a lot of central utilities on site. And I have just marked this, and David and Scott can go more into detail later, but this is actually all this you see here, here, and here. These are tanks that will be filled with fish. So there's a lot of water and fish inside of these buildings. What I have marked in red is 2 tanks and then the RAS system. And basically this is a contained system that's replicated. So, and that's part of our biosecurity measures to ensure that if something happens, and nothing ever happened to any of our facilities so far, but if it happens, they're contained units. So basically what you say when you build larger facilities is that you take a smaller facility and you replicate it, and you get the benefits of the economy of scale and all the shared utilities and infrastructure. So David will come back to more to what we do in terms of treatment and biosecurity as well. So, and timeline. I think I've shown this timeline before. It is a tentative timeline. There are, of course, a lot of uncertainties when you build a project like this. First one being the permitting process. We will, together with GHD and a few other vendors, submit our permit applications and our SECA documents this fall. And hopefully we'll spend the next year in obtaining part of the permitting process and public hearings and input and assessments that goes into achieving or obtaining these permits. Then eventually, once we have obtained permits, we will start engineering and planning, and also demolition. We've had a demolition study, and it turns out to clean up the site and demolish the existing infrastructure, they anticipated 8 months, which was a little bit more than we originally, or at least I originally thought. But that's it's a good assumption, and it ensures that we can actually clean up the site sufficiently to build. So I have put that in as a buffer, and we also need to start doing the foundation work. If you have any questions, I'm sure that Ed in particular can answer those later. And then it takes about 2 years to build a facility. But you can start production before, because you start with the hatchery, and then you can actually put eggs into the facility before you have finished the grow up modules. So there is some overlap. Most likely we'll have fish in the market in 25. And that's how long it takes to build a project like this. I thought initially 24. We might, be able to make it to 24, but a realistic timeline would be anywhere between 24 and 25 until we have full grown fish into the market. So, and then eventually, phase 2 will start. What the numbers that you see in these studies are for the whole fully built out facility, meaning we will be probably somewhere in 26, 27 until we have that amount of discharge and impact. So I think this is the general intro. I would like to leave it to David, who is the expert in these studies. These studies were prepared, as you can see, by a lot of people locally in Eureka, but also all the way to Perth, and then of course in Maine, and they have also been assessed back in Europe. So a lot of people, people have been involved in this, and a lot of expertise, and I think we've come to some good conclusions, and I will leave it to David to take it from here.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction, Marianne. And it is important to give credit where credit is due, because there's a lot of work that went into the couple of studies that we're about to present. And if you go and look at these studies, you'll see there's an incredible amount of detail and work and background work that has gone into these. And I really implore you, if you have detailed technical questions, to go in and take a look, because there is a wealth of information there for you to examine. If you could go to the next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start basically back out at the discharge pipe and work my way back into the facility. And then we'll start to describe the discharge itself and the constituents of it, and then end the conversation by talking about, so what does it mean and what are the impacts to the marine animals that are out in the ocean, and then kind of work. So what I'd like to do first is start by describing the existing discharge pipe that's out there. So it's important to note that this is existing infrastructure. We're not going to be building something new. So this is a 36-inch diameter pipe. It's 8,200 feet long. And at the end of this pipe, there's an 852-foot section covered with diffusers. And you'll see a cross-section of the pipe down the lower left-hand corner. So you have 2 diffusers at an angle jutting out into either direction. And this pipe is in an average depth of 79 feet of water. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to work our way backwards. If you'll go to the next slide, please. And we're going to talk about the wastewater treatment facility. And so as Marianne was showing you that bird's eye view of the facility, you'll notice that with all those tanks, there's a mechanical area behind them. So we do an incredible amount of water treatment on the facility, and in the production units themselves, we have a very low replacement rate of water where we recycle and reuse the water with only a 1% replacement rate. So for every gallon of water that comes onto the facility, we reuse it 99 times in those systems. And we're removing the solids, and we're breaking down the nitrogen and the ammonia in the production units before it goes to the wastewater treatment plant. In the wastewater treatment plant, there we remove 99% of the phosphorus, 99% of the solids, and then we go through a very high level of disinfection before it goes out for discharge. And what's important to know is that in this facility, we will have backup power to power all of the critical functions to include the wastewater treatment plant. So if there's a rolling blackout, there's a brownout for any reason, we will have power on site to keep the critical functions going, to keep the fish alive, and to protect the environment. To include our intake and wastewater treatment plant will be fully operational regardless of whether or not it's connected to the grid or if it's running on backup generation. And we're using very high standard, well-established technologies. This would be our 5th large facility. So this is something we're very well crafted with and have a deep and understanding. If you go to the next slide, please. So I want to highlight 2 of the major workhorses here, and that's the Mbrs and the UV systems that we use. So the Mbrs are a microfiltration filtration method that are so effective that they're actually able to filter out particles down to the size of bacteria. And that's how we're able to really get such an efficient and effective reduction of all the constituents in the effluent before it leaves a facility. So one of the key advantages to land-based aquaculture is we're able to filter the water before it leaves the facility and capture all of those solids. Importantly, we're also able to disinfect the water before it leaves the facility. Now, a 300 millijoule dose of UV light is roughly 6 times the dose that most people agree is adequate to disinfect the water. So these 2 solutions and technologies combined, we're really applying similar treatment levels and methods and standards for what you would expect to see in a drinking water facility if someone were treating surface water to then give to the general public for consumption as drinking water. But we're putting this on the end of our wastewater treatment plant because we're committed to protecting the environment and having the lowest possible impact. If you go to the next slide, please. So before I go on to what is in the effluent, I want to talk about what's not in the effluent. So we have a very high level of disinfection in the facility. We basically employ 2 primary methods of disinfection, UV and ozone. So we apply a disinfection dose on the intake water coming in with both ozone and UV. We give a secondary ozone treatment for the water coming in before it goes on to the facility. And then as it's recirculating in the systems, let's say we reuse each gallon of water 99 times in the systems before it leaves the facility. Each time it passes through that system, 99 times it's getting a dose of ozone and UV for additional disinfection. Then as that 1% replacement comes off and goes to the wastewater treatment facility, it goes through our membrane filtration system, which is small enough to remove bacteria level particles, and then gets another kill dose of UV before it goes out. So as you look through this, you see that there is a very robust firewall of disinfection for the water coming in as it recirculates through and before it goes out of the facility, which prevents any pathogens and parasites from entering the facility, establishing in the facility, or leaving the facility. So now I've talked about what's not going to be in the effluent. If you go to the next slide, please. I'd like to talk about what will be in the effluent. And so while we can remove roughly 99% of the constituents in the effluent, there still remains that little bit that is there. And so the table on the left comes directly from the NPDES or discharge permits. The numbers on the right are the numbers that we used for the dilution study. Now these are thresholds or maximum amounts and are quite conservative and are not the real daily amounts that will come out of the facility. these are numbers that we don't expect to actually reach. These are very high numbers, and we will be below that to ensure that we never breach any of our discharge permits. And so we took a very conservative approach when utilizing the numbers to look at our potential impacts. What is the absolute worst case that we could ever see coming out of this facility, and what would be the impacts? That's what we wanted to evaluate. And the important part of the dilution study is what is the concentration of what's in that water? So first off, total volume. We're looking at 12.5 million gallons a day coming out of the facility. Now this is a maximum threshold amount that would be at the end of phase 2. We'd be using a lower amount in phase 1. Total suspended solids, approximately 18 kilograms a day. Again, that would be a maximum or ceiling amount that we would not be reaching. 162 kilograms a day of biochemical oxygen demands. Total nitrogen on the order of 673 kilograms a day. 0.07 kilograms a day of ammonium. And total phosphorus on the order of 5.8 kilograms a day. Again, these are maximum ceiling thresholds that we will not be hitting, but we have to put an amount on the discharge permit, and these are the ceilings that we've applied for. Now, what's rather important with the dilution study is as you put those amounts, those daily amounts into the water volume, what are the concentrations? And those concentrations actually turn out to be very low. And one of the key things I want to point out here is the salinity. This will be increasingly important as we discuss the results of the dilution study and what they mean, and the overall transport of things. The salinity is slightly lower, or it's less salty than the surrounding Pacific Ocean. And this allows the effluent to rise from the bottom towards the surface. And as it does that, it starts to spread out and it disperses and becomes more dilute. Now, an important dilution factor that we've identified is 200 to 1. And we expect to reach that dilution factor within approximately 60 feet of the diffusers. And now I'd like you to remember that the average water depth is 79 feet where those diffusers are. And so going from the top down to talk through each of these, the ammonia, which is typically thought of as one of the most toxic potential constituents, is 100 times less than the water quality objective set. So 0.004 milligrams per liter is significantly lower than the 0.6 milligrams per liter the regulatory authorities would like to typically see in an effluent. So we are so far below this that ammonia toxicity is not a concern for this project. Total suspended solids with a concentration of 3.9 milligrams is incredibly clean water compared to what you would typically expect to see out in the open ocean. This is likely half as much of the total suspended solids as you would likely find on a very clear day out in the ocean. Temperature is quite close to the ambience or the expected normal temperature out in the ocean. There's a very tight window, which is regulated. So we can't exceed that window, and that window is roughly 4 degrees. Discuss salinity, and we're going to go into more detail over the next slides about some of the nutrients. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the first thing I'd like to talk about is explain what the model is and how it generated the numbers that we're going to look at over the next couple of slides. So this is a 3D model based off of the Danish Hydraulic Institute's Mike 3 hydrodynamic model. And some of the important things that I took into consideration were surface winds, river inflows, and tidal influence. And so as you can see by the graphic on the left, horizontally, this considered a massive swath of area for the near field impacts and far field impacts. If you go to the next slide, please. Additionally, it used a total of 11 layers vertically. So you have a very complex model, both horizontally in size and complexity, but also vertically, it looked at 11 layers, and those layers actually expand and contract in response to the tidal column. And so as the water level rises and falls with the tides, the model takes that into account. with a high level of detail in the upper 8 meters of water with 4 layers packed into those upper 8 meters of water. And the graphic on the left just shows a high degree of resolution and understanding of the topography of the area that went into the model. Next slide, please. So now we have a slightly better understanding of what's in the effluent, what's not in the effluents, what the model is that was used, and the overall area that it examines. I'd like to start talking about some of the impacts or some of the outcomes of the model. So what's really important to the understanding of the overall area is that currents are constantly transporting surface and mid-water through the area. So in general, animals that would be in the area would really only experience elevated nutrient levels on the order of minutes. It's a very short-term exposure. And that because this commingled discharge is slightly less salty than the surrounding ocean, it has a tendency to rise. And because there's weak stratification in the area, or basically the layers of salinity really aren't very strong, the plume has a tendency to rise and spread out as it does it. And the overall result is that the risk for negative water quality impacts to the surface and mid-water columns are very low, and there's a low risk of enhanced seafloor productivity, and that there's a negligible material increase in open ocean ecosystem productivity under the conditions that were identified in the dilution study. Next slide, please. So there are 2 distinct seasons we know in Northern California. There's both summer and winter, and so we took those seasonality differences under examination. And overall in the summer, there's very weak stratification. So the tendency for the water to set up in distinct layers, basically there's very little or to virtually no of that. And that allows the water to spread out and disperse very easily. And the overall result of this is there's a very low risk of negative water quality impacts during the summer months. And that's because the water quality degradation is really dependent on salinity stratification, and you really don't see that out in the open Pacific Ocean. And so the wording that was used in this report is very specific, and I didn't want to conflate it or reword this. And so the way that it's examined is, what is the chance that you would expect to exceed the adopted thresholds, and where would you see that potential line? So that line of where you would expect to see any chance of exceeding the adopted thresholds to never exceeding it is roughly 1 kilometer from the diffusers at the surface. And it's about 50 meters as you get down closer to the diffusers. And that's because of the tendency of that effluent to rise because it's less saline, but also because you have a very large diffuser area and it's rapidly mixing and diluting. Again, that target of 200-to-1 dilution ratio is met quite readily within 60 feet of the diffusers. Next slide, please. So again, because there are 2 distinct seasons, we also looked at the winter conditions, and we saw very similar outcomes where, again, there's a very low risk of negative water quality impacts, both to the benthos and also to the midwater column. But because there's more freshwater impact, there's really no expectation that the adopted thresholds would be exceeded at the surface waters. It's a slightly different outcome. However, it's also very similar to the summertime outcome in that there's very low risk of negative water quality impacts to any of the water column. Next slide, please. And so I've had this question asked a few times, and that's why we chose to answer this directly. And this was a question we were also very interested in because we cannot move our intake for this facility. We want to know if there was any potential risk of increased domoic acid production as a result of this facility. And the potential increase of domoic acid producing diatoms is very low. Typically, the production of domoic acid producing diatoms is related to very large scale events such as the marine heat wave of 2015, which is what this chlorophyll map is depicting here, which everyone unfortunately was all too aware of as it forced the closure of the Dungeness crab fishery. We're intently interested and concerned about this as well. And the last thing we want to do is be a contributing factor to this and the overall results of the dilution study and the marine resources report makes us believe that this would not be an issue. Next slide, please. So again, I want to come back to highlighting some of the individual constituents and specifically ammonia, because it's typically one of the most toxic things that you would find in a typical wastewater treatment effluents. However, this is one of the things that we do a very efficient and effective job at breaking down and removing through our advanced wastewater treatment technology. The fish within the facility are very susceptible and acutely react to ammonia. And so we do a very efficient and effective job at breaking it down and removing it all the way down through the various steps and pulling it out and not allowing it to leave the facility, to the point that the ammonia concentrations are 100 times less than the targeted water quality objectives, to the point that the targets are actually readily met within less than 5 feet from the diffuser. And I just want to point out again that, it may be a little bit difficult to read, but that 0.004 milligrams per liter is substantially lower than the water quality objective of 0.6 milligrams per liter for ammonia concentrations. Next slide, please. So what does all this water chemistry and these dilution studies and the dynamics of all these moving around mean to the sea life in the ocean? This is not an exhaustive list. I invite you to go read the Marine Resources report if there's a species that we missed in here, as we highlighted some of the bigger animals that most people would think of immediately. And you'll notice a trend as we go through this. So specifically, what are potential impacts to the California sea lion? Well, sea lions are highly mobile, and their exposure to the effluents likely to be short-term, as they'd likely move quite quickly through the area. Stellar sea lions, there are breeding colonies. We understand why they are, and they're quite far from the diffuser. Again, those are highly mobile species, and their expected exposure to the diffuser effluent is likely to be quite short-term. Harbor seals, another highly mobile species that also forage in the area and in Humboldt Bay, and we anticipate their exposure to the effluent is also likely to be short-term. Next slide, please. We also know that gray whales migrate through the area. And because it's a very small spatial scale of where the effluent actually is, even if a migratory gray whale were to pass through it, it's a mobile species, and they would move through the effluent area, and their exposure would, we expect to be quite short-term. Quite similar with harbor porpoises, although they often occur year-round in the study area. Again, they're highly mobile species, and we expect that their exposure would be quite short-term. We also looked at seabirds because we know that there is a particular species in this area that forages, and in this particular inshore area, they're a mobile species, and their exposure to the effluent, again, would likely be quite short-term. Next slide, please. And so we also looked at what are potential impacts and exposure of some of the important species of fish in the area. And I apologize if this sounds quite repetitive, but you'll notice that the exposure for all these fish, these are all highly mobile fish. They move in and out and around the area, and their exposure to the effluents, again, would likely be short-term. We even looked at the cuddly lamprey, a favorite of most people, and even though it's slightly less understood, we still expect that its exposure to the effluent will be rather short-term. Next slide, please. So we've talked a little bit now about the general layout of the effluent pipe, what it looks like, the diffusers, the layout of the wastewater treatment facility at a very general and high level. We've talked about the very robust disinfection treatment methods that we employ at the facility, the very robust, world-class, well understood wastewater treatment technologies that we have applied at our facilities and have direct experience utilizing. And we've looked at the water chemistry, what's in the effluents, and also what are the potential impacts for marine life as they're exposed to that effluent. And so I'd like to sum up, restating that we are fish farmers above all else, and we are also reliant on clean, cool water for our facility to be successful. And we are committed not just to meeting, but exceeding regulatory expectations. Because it's important to us not just to say that we're going to be a good neighbor, but we are a good neighbor. We are commercially motivated to protect the marine resources that we are also reliant upon, which is that clean water and that marine resource. Then I'll remind you that we disinfect the water going into the facility with each recirculating pass and prior to discharge, and that we use 2 disinfection technologies which are proven and very effective and well understood in ozone and UV, and this prevents pathogens from entering or leaving the facility. Our baseline design, our starting point for each of these disinfection steps is a 4-log removal. That's a 99.99% removal of pathogens at each disinfection step. I will reiterate that although the reports aren't available yet, we have taken great care to consider earthquake and tsunami events for the entire facility and have incorporated that into our designs for fish escape prevention. Just to rehash some of the results that we talked about here today, there's a very low risk of negative impacts to the surface, midwater, or bottom waters from the effluent. The dilution target of 200 to 1 for the zone of water quality degradation is readily met within 60 feet of the diffusers. And the increased risk, or the risk of increased domoic acid producing diatoms, is very low. And that the currents are constantly transporting surface and midwater waters through the area, and the duration that ocean animals would experience elevated nutrients is limited to a very short term or a matter of minutes. So with that, that was my summation slide, and I believe some questions have started to come in, and I thank you very much for your patience and listening to me ramble on for a bit. Unfortunately, our dilution study modeler was not available for this conversation, and so we will attempt to answer all of your questions, but I implore you, if you have very technical or heavy questions, to submit them to us in writing, and then we can attempt to get you a very detailed and technical answer. I would also invite you to go find these studies. There's a wealth of information in there, and look through them yourselves and generate some questions from there. And we look forward to having an open dialogue and conversation about the facility. Thank you.
David, thank you very much for that information. So I know there's some folks that have joined our meeting since we started and may not have heard the introduction. So we have now concluded the formal part of the presentation. It has been recorded. So if people here missed a part of it, please feel free to reach out and we will make sure to get you the recording. Now is the time for questions and answers. And what we are asking, if you are not already identified, Zoom will identify you if you put your name in the program before, but if it is not already there, if you would please identify yourself in the chat, note your location. Nordic would like to prioritize questions from Humboldt County residents. And then we should have time, of course, for all of them, but Nordic representatives just really want to make sure that everybody from Humboldt County has a chance to get their questions answered. So again, your name, where you are, and then your question. And if you would put it in the chat, what I'm going to do is read the question out loud so that everybody, even those on the phone, know what we're addressing. And then Marianne will then either answer that question directly or pass it on to the most appropriate person on the Nordic team. So to start, at any point now, people can put questions in the chat. I do ask that you stay muted. I'm going to go ahead and start reading the questions. We have one in the chat, and then we'll just go from there. So like I said, at any point, please feel free to share your question. So what we have in the chat, Marianne, and for folks that can't read it, please talk about viruses, heavy metals, and the various chemicals, antibiotics, etc., used in the event of disease outbreak. Also, please talk about the potential effects of exposure to surfers who tend to spend a lot of time in the water in the area near the discharge point.
Well, I think the appropriate person to answer that would be David again. So I'm going to leave it to you, David.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the question, Jen. So thank you for that. Actually, it's something that probably didn't spend a lot of time talking about. However, it is a fairly important point and a very important distinction between us and net pen producers. Because one of the really important and discerning differences between land-based aquaculture and net pen aquaculture is the ability to exclude parasites and pathogens from the facility. And so by having a very robust filtration and disinfection method, we're able to first stop the bugs and the parasites from coming onto the farm. Additionally, we have a very robust and well-trained and experienced staff who are trained in identifying issues, but we also have a very competent partner in Kennebec River Biosciences. And this is a veterinarian who basically, he works on 6 continents, and he works with like 200 species. And so we will employ a vaccination program for any identified pathogens of concern. Basically, the same as you and I are hoping for a vaccine here fairly shortly. We administer a vaccine to our fish once they become old enough to become competent fish. And that provides them an additional level of protection and support. Additionally, we do quarterly health analysis where, again, we bring in that veterinary professional and we do an analysis and a random sampling of our cohorts of our fish. And so we sample those fish and screen them for any potential pathogens. And I should actually go back quite a bit further to the parental stock and the brood stock, which is actually where the pathogen and disease testing and health practices start. So first ensuring that the parentage is healthy, then we test and check the eggs before they leave that facility, before they come to ours. When they get to our facility, we then hold those eggs at a reduced temperature, not allowing them to develop until they've been sent out and we've received negative test results for all pathogens of concern. We disinfect those eggs at our facility again, and then we allow them to develop, and then we monitor them throughout their life stage, continuously checking them to make sure that there aren't any pathogens of concern developing. In relation to heavy metals, our fish are also quite sensitive to things like heavy metals, and that's actually one of the fastest way to kill your fish. And so that is something that we are constantly monitoring. We have world-class water quality analysis capabilities at our disposal, both externally and internally. We have some fantastic people on staff with an incredible amount of water quality knowledge. The amount of water chemistry knowledge required to be a fish farmer, it would really kind of blow your minds. To speak specifically to the chemicals and antibiotics, we have not had a need to use antibiotics or chemical treatments or chemotherapeutics on any of our facilities because of the level of best management practices that we apply. Our health management practices.
Excuse me, David.
And additionally, because of this, we have not had to, or nor do we want to use antibiotics for any reason. However, if we were to ever have to administer any sort of a treatment, it would be prescribed and administered under the direct supervision of a veterinary professional. And as far as the potential effect of surfers, the final part of the question, so there's really very limited organic materials, and that is the complete amount of effluent coming out. And so it really is very benign effluent that's coming out and is rapidly and readily diffused long before it gets to the surface where surfers would be.
Lynette, can you hear me? This is
Without too much detail. And again, happy to walk through this more at a later date. Hopefully I didn't lose anybody with some of that bit of a rambling explanation there.
Lynette, can you hear me?
People, hey Dennis, I'm going to let you know, yes, I can hear you, but I'm going to ask that you stay muted, just because unfortunately it is interfering with the presentation when other folks are talking. So my request is that all questions get submitted through the chat. Unfortunately, I can't mute everyone because our speakers need to talk. So, so I'm just going to ask that folks please keep yourself muted. And if you could submit your questions through the chat, that's very much appreciated. Even the follow-up questions that you have for the presenters, if you wouldn't mind please putting those through the chat, we will make sure that they get addressed. And so I am, because that was Jennifer's question that was being.
Lynette, thank you. Let me know.
Sorry, folks. I'm going to.
Lynette, can we, it seems like Jen had some follow-up questions.
Yes, exactly right. I was just getting to it. I unfortunately was having to address someone that was unable to stay muted. So sorry about that. Okay, and I was just told I can mute everyone and then manually unmute. And I do apologize, folks. I am still, quite frankly, learning Zoom. So please forgive me for the glitches here. So the follow-up question, I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, says the MPDS permit in Belfast included about 30 chemicals that could be used. Would you please address this?
I think I'll leave that to David as well, and Ed might also be able to add something to it. I think, before I leave it to them, I mean, it's important to understand that these chemicals are not only chemicals that would be in the water and in the discharge, and also it includes a contingency list. In Maine, the system, you have to provide anything that you can conceivably use in any conceivable circumstance. So it's not necessarily things we're using, but I'm leaving it to David, and then for Ed to supplement if necessary.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a fantastic introduction, Marianne, that we listed a high level of contingency chemicals and potential chemotherapeutics that we actually have not had a need to deploy in our other facilities. And rather than just list one potentially effective treatment, we listed a variety for the same thing. So you'll see a list of multiple potential chemicals. However, it would be one out of that list that would be applied in a singular thing. There's also a high level of disinfectant and cleaners, and those are specifically for the food processing facility. Because we're processing raw seafood, there's a high level of need for proper sanitation and disinfection of all of the surfaces and the equipment throughout that entire area. And so there's a fair amount of cleaners and disinfectants that you'll see in there, which are not intended for use in the fish production and grow out facility, but directly in the processing facility for food safety reasons. And so that is a large chunk of that chemical list actually. And again, there are multiple cleaners listing alternatives so that if we identified, say, a single cleaner and then there was a more effective cleaner that was out there, or that cleaner was no longer available, we wouldn't be limited. So we kind of put everything out there and then some with some contingencies. And so that's why you see an unusually detailed list from what you would often see at other facilities. Some of the larger uses are really like the chemical micro C is actually a carbon source for our denitrification. And so we feed the bacteria by providing carbon, and that allows it to break down that ammonia into harmless constituents and remove it from the system so we don't discharge that out into the ocean, which is a step most facilities skip because it's a fairly expensive process, but something that we're committed to doing.
Is it fair to say though, David, that any chemical that will be used potentially on site will be treated before it's discharged?
Yes, yeah, all, anything and everything that we use will be used in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations, and would be readily uptaken and broken down by its use before it goes out. And anything that goes down, anything on the facility, with the exception of the human waste that would go to the wastewater treatment facility, will go to our wastewater treatment facility, where it will be fully treated and broken down and disinfected before it's discharged. And I will also reiterate that there will be a robust monitoring program out in the bay to ensure both directly after the last process in the wastewater treatment facility, but also out in the bay, that we're doing everything that we should be doing.
Ed, do you have anything to add to it?
I think David just touched on what I was going to add in, that these elements and chemicals are used as directed by the manufacturer, or in some cases a veterinarian, and they're used up in the process of doing the cleaning work. So for instance, a bleach that would be used up to clean a food processing facility gets used up by those organics, so that it's no longer a harmful substance when it gets out to the waste discharge. So that's all I was going to add, and I think David touched on that briefly.
Okay, and Jen, if you've got any follow-up questions, please do put them in the chat and we will make sure we get to them. So next question, can you talk about measures taken to ensure fish don't escape through the discharge?
Okay.
Yeah, Marion, could you put up slide 32?
Okay.
Excellent, thank you. So what I'd like to go over, this is kind of a generic overview of the many different methods of fish escape prevention that we've incorporated into the facility. And so there's a couple of measures. You'll notice the most direct path to the ocean is from a fish jumping out of the tank onto the floor. That usually doesn't work out so well for fish. And so as you'll see, there's anywhere from 5 to 7 barriers between our fish and an outfall. Now, a typical standard fish containment management system is 2 barriers. And so what we've done is for each life stage and in each system, the various floor drain grates, central well grates, tank outlet grates, and the overflow sumps are all sized to the specific life cycle of the fish in that system, to ensure that none of the fish have any chance of leaving the facility. Additionally, these are all indoors facilities and hundreds of feet from the water's edge. And so you would, there's very, very limited and low potential that any fish could ever escape the facility. You would have to have a catastrophic failure of roughly a dozen systems to have the potential for a fish to somehow make it out of the facility. And we have incorporated tsunami and seismic considerations into this. And so the jump netting, the number 1 highlighted in blue there, even if there was a massive earthquake and water were sloshing back and forth in the tent, or in the tank, it would still contain the fish within the tank, even if the water were to spill out. If the fish were somehow to get through that netting, there would still be a graded floor drain covering. If they were to get through that covered and graded floor drain covering, there's still a central well that would then have an additional catchment that would prevent the fish from leaving the facility through there. And then still they would have to get through the entire wastewater treatment facility with several barriers there before they would ever get to the outfall out into the open ocean. And that's the shortest pass to the ocean.
Scott, can you address also, I mean, we have done quite a lot of design and done some seismic and tsunami studies. I don't know if you want to touch upon that and explain what we've done and why it's quite impossible for fish to escape. And I will put up the site plan. Let's see. Here.
So as Marianne mentioned, we're still working on our tsunami and seismic analysis right now. So the results of those aren't final. But we've employed Gary Chalk, who's one of the leading experts in the world as far as analyzing tsunami risk. And he had some preliminary recommendations, and we have incorporated those into our design. You'll notice that the western facing building edges are rounded on the corners, and that's to help water move around the buildings and prevent scouring of the soils underneath the corners of the buildings. I also noticed another question that's kind of along the same line, that we've talked a lot about fish during a tsunami, but we haven't really talked about the humans at the facility very much. But all the buildings are designed to survive a tsunami event without any fish escape. The basics, you know, the buildings are filled with giant tanks of water. So when you have water pushing against water, we have some nice synergy there that we can work off of. But because of the location at the facility and the amount of time for waves to arrive at the facility, we'd most likely have a refuge in the facility where all the employees would gather at one location. And that would have additional engineering to ensure the health and safety of everybody at the facility during the event. And that would also be open, you know, to the neighboring properties at the RMT2 facility to, you know, allow for the health and safety of everybody in the area.
An additional consideration that we've taken into account is we have elevated or plan to elevate our backup generators, so they would be above the inundation level in the event of a tsunami. So we would still have emergency power to power any critical infrastructure that's left given a catastrophic event.
And I think it's fair to say too that the preliminary results from the tsunami assessment that Mr. Chuck is doing, it shows that with a 2,500 year event, the site wouldn't be fully inundated, I mean, to the top of the level of the tanks. So there's no way that, you know, water in itself will push the fish out of tanks. Or so I don't know if you have, Scott can elaborate on that a little bit, the inundation levels and how we can, you know, deal with it.
Yeah, they are still preliminary at this point, so I wouldn't want to give a hard number, but he's taking a very close look at it and running a very detailed model that has 1 meter resolution across the whole site, so we can really see in fine detail what would happen in an event like that. And one of the other points, just to discuss the seismic risk at the site, you know, the sand spit is obviously made of sand. And that's a big risk and consideration of liquefaction during seismic events. So we've done a considerable investigation and analysis at different foundation options that we can use and ground densification options that can help eliminate that liquefaction risk. So, you know, the intention of the design is that, you know, in a worst case scenario, this facility will still be intact. And, you know, the preliminary investigations are showing that that's totally feasible, and that, you know, we might be able to find some nice synergy in recycling materials already at the site. So.
I did show some inundation levels, but last year that was the first preliminary assessments from Dr. Chuck or Mr. Chuck, and it turns out, I mean, as Scott said, we don't have the final results yet, but it turns out to be less inundation than we anticipated last year. So, and even with considering sea level rise as well. So it's quite a lot of water and fish. As Scott said, I think the buildings are designed to withstand the forces of any tsunami coming in. Other questions?
Okay, thank you. So the next question, does Nordic Aquafarms raise genetically engineered fish anywhere? And my request again to the questioners, if you wouldn't mind, please, most of the names are there, but if you wouldn't mind also letting us know where you are from, that would be helpful, just because Nordic wants to prioritize questions from local residents. So again, does Nordic raise genetically engineered fish anywhere?
No, and we do not plan to do that in Humboldt either. So that's
I would expand that in Denmark, we actually have our own brood stock. So we have our own parentage where we've raised our own fish and then continue to raise them as parents for the next generation of fish. So we're in complete control of all of the heritage and lineage of our fish in our Danish operations.
And you can't do that in Norway either. So, and we do not plan to do that here in the States. I don't think that's, I don't think the target group or consumers that we're want to sell us this fish to would appreciate that, and it's never been considered. We will not consider it. We can grow the fish in less than 2 years without using any GMO or genetically altered fish, and we intend to do so. And when you promise that out to the consumers in the market, and they have a fully traceable product, and I think consumers will demand even more traceability going forward. So anything that we feed the fish or anything that we do and where the eggs come from will be completely transparent. I'm pretty sure that the market will be more closer to blockchain and similar technologies by the time we're in the market. But the answer is no.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question, is there any way to use the effluent for terrestrial farming?
Yes, we can. Ed, or do you want to answer it? Or Scott, maybe Scott, you can answer it.
Sure. I mean, so the effluent itself, unfortunately, these are saltwater fish for most of their life once they get out of the hatchery. So the high salt content of the effluent, it really doesn't make it suitable for terrestrial farming. But there are many other co-products that are coming out of the facility that can be used for terrestrial farming, and we're certainly, engaging with local stakeholders that work, on soil amendments and other type products to see, where we can find synergy and get as much local reuse of all the, the co-products that come out of the facility, and yeah, where it's appropriate. But salt is definitely an issue for the effluent itself.
Well, we have a lot of byproducts in the sludge, for example. I don't know, Ed, it seems like you want to address this.
I was just going to say that the idea that of waste coming off the project is not something that is attractive for us from a commercial standpoint. It's not the best use of products, and that starts from demolition right through production. We're looking at reuse of demolition materials. We're looking at reuse of soils, and we're looking at reuse for all the byproducts, like Scott started to mention, the sludge, the fish byproducts, everything on site. If we can find a way to reuse it, it makes commercial sense for us. It makes environmental sense, and it's the way all of our projects really proceed right now, because it just it's the best way to proceed, and that's our plan for Humboldt as well.
Well, you can use it for biogas, for example, the sludge and the byproducts from the fish itself. There's a lot of uses for. So fish oil, pet food, etc. I mean, so we have letters of intent in Maine for all our byproducts. That's part of the permitting conditions, and we will work on the same here. Commercial agreements. So we anticipate to use 100% of the fish and also deal with the feed residuals and feces or the sludge from the facility. So there are many ways you could use it.
Yeah, and I would just add on the last part there that we have direct experience in our other facilities where our fish sludge goes to biogas production in our European facilities, and we're directly working with organic fertilizer producers and talking with biogas facilities in Maine, and hope to find similar partners and grow the economy in that area around those similar type of organic fertilizers and biogas and energy production out there in the West Coast. So fantastic fit for the area, I think.
A lot of opportunities too.
Lynette, I don't mean to steal this from you, but I think the next question is kind of an expansion on this. So what I was talking about was the fish byproducts, that the parts.
Read the question.
Sure.
Yeah, just to keep in mind that there are folks on the call that are on the phone and may not be able to see the chat.
So the question basically is roughly what rate of waste fish in production is there? For example, to produce 1,000 pounds of fish, how much of that is waste and what waste is, and how is that waste disposed of. So David can talk to this more, but to expand on what I was saying, that there is no waste product really. And Marianne was just touching on this as well. Depending on the product, there are certain parts of the fish that are not going to the seafood market, but there are other markets for it. There's pet food, there's makeup, there's fish oil products, and there are people that would like to see that product show up at their door very much. So we intend to work with those vendors that want that product and find a home for it. Makes good commercial sense, and it also makes environmental sense. As far as the percentage, I'll pass that off to David, who again is the connection between my engineering skills and the fish people.
Thanks. So we're actually trying to get closer and closer to the pork industry on this, where they use everything except the oink. Our goal here is to use everything except for the splash. So I feel bad for not incorporating this slide because it's one of my favorite slides. The amounts of potential co-products and different products that the different parts of the fish can be turned into is mind-boggling, from cosmetics to pharmaceutical products to pet food to fertilizers. I mean, the list, it goes on, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. And so if you're of the entrepreneurial spirit and you are interested in developing a value-added product from one of these co-products, there's a fantastic opportunity here for you. And basically, your imagination is the limit. There are literally thousands of products that the different parts of the fish can be turned into. You know, in Maine, we're talking about using salmon heads as a fantastic lobster bait. I'm sure it would work just as well as a crab bait out here. The viscera, we've had actually surprisingly pig farmers contact us. They're incredibly interested in using the viscera or the guts from the fish coming out as pig feed. And it's a fairly high recovery rate overall. You know, you're talking, you know, roughly 84% recovery from a head-on gutted fish goes to market. And so of that 16% that would be cut off, that's really, you know, your guts and your blood that are coming out of the fish, and those have many reuses and are high value products. And it really depends on where you look and how you want to apply them, as an organic fertilizer, as a pharmaceutical product, as a pet food. The list just goes on and on. Looking forward to developing some of those opportunities with the community as people come forward looking to engage us with some of those value-added opportunities.
Okay, let's go on to the next question here. How many local residents do you plan to employ once the project is in operation, and what type of jobs would be available?
Okay, I can answer that. Our projections now is approximately 150 jobs at the facility. And it's a wide range of jobs, from fish production, working in the grow-out facility or the hatchery. There are maintenance jobs. There are water quality jobs. There are fish processing jobs. There are some staff and administrative functions. There are ranging from, I would say, from high school graduates to people with college degrees, bachelor's and master's. And we're also working with, started initiating some work with the community college to look at a aquaculture certificate, where we can, people can get trained for working in fish production and in producing fish. So there's a wide range of jobs, and I hope that we can find most of them locally. I think here we can. That's one of the reasons why we located to Humboldt. Having, you know, with the HSU and the community college and the aquaculture and biology focus that we've had at HSU, I think there are a lot of qualified people, and I think also Humboldt is a nice community. So it's easy, if you can't find a person in Humboldt, then hopefully you can attract some people to move to Humboldt with their families. In addition to that, there's a approximately 250 to 300 jobs during construction. And whatever we can find locally, we'll try to find locally. So, and we are in dialogue with operating engineers and also local contractors and local companies. And the more we can find locally, the better. But, you know, everyone has to be qualified, and I'm certain that we can find qualified people. And I also think there are opportunities for training locally. So hopefully, and they're good jobs. And also what we usually say that for each job that we create, there is a ripple effect. So, you know, you probably create an additional 2 to 3 jobs usually when you have a cornerstone company like this or a facility like this. So hopefully this will be, and you know, the idea was to bring a larger aquaculture company in and be a catalyst for other ancillary businesses and other businesses that can grow adjacent to our business as well, which I think would be great.
Wonderful, thank you for that. So the next question, can you please speak about any of the air quality issues of scent, smell that will be discharged directly or indirectly from the facility?
Ed, I mean, you have the experience from Maine, and this is a similar facility, so I guess you can do that. And maybe Scott, you can add something to add for local context.
Sure. The primary thing to think about is that, as you see, we don't have open air facilities. Everything is enclosed in buildings. So that gives us the opportunity to capture the air and treat it when needed. The primary areas are fish production. It's ocean water. It's ocean water with fish in it. And it doesn't provide odors or doesn't give the opportunity for odors other than what the ocean smells like nearby. So that takes care of most of the buildings. There are a couple areas where we need to focus on capturing that air. And that's the production area, the fish processing, sorry, not production, but processing, and the wastewater treatment. And those are no different than other food service facilities that have food products or wastewater treatment facilities. And we know that there are old wastewater treatment facilities that are a problem. There are new facilities that are not a problem. And that's where we look to go, is we've got a state-of-the-art wastewater treatment facility that's enclosed in a building, and any air that leaves that building has the opportunity to be captured and treated as needed. So that gives us a good head start. As far as the food processing, the biggest thing is that fresh food doesn't smell bad. Rotting food smells bad. And what we do is provide fresh food to the local markets. And we're not going to let food sit around or fish sit around long enough that the bacteria could create odors. So that's the best way of preventing odors. Don't let it start to smell. Keep the product fresh and get it off and refrigerated before it smells. And that leaves, like I said, the wastewater treatment. So that's our plan there to prevent smells. We do not expect that there's going to be any odors coming from this facility, other than maybe a faint saltwater smell, but I don't think anybody's going to notice that with the saltwater surrounding us on the site.
One thing I will expand on in the processing area is that we generate and create the most value from the co-products that come off the fish by treating everything that comes out of the processing facility as a food grade product. It's also an important mindset to have in terms of maintaining food safety and cleanliness in the facility, and that nothing gets treated differently. Everything gets treated as if it's headed for human consumption in the facility until it gets loaded on a different truck. But everything that comes into that facility goes out of that facility on that same shift, as Ed noted, so things don't pile up and hang around. The idea, one of the distinct advantages behind having the processing facility at the farm is the ability to get the product out of the water and in the hands of the customer in a matter of hours versus days for imported products.
Scott, do you have anything to add from the local work that we've been doing in Humboldt?
I mean, just that we all remember what it smelled like when the pulp mill was operational, and nobody wants to head in that direction at all. We won't be impacting Eureka with the sickly sweet or any other odor like the days of old.
Well, I guess it's also fair to say that any waste that are not shipped off directly will either be kept in airtight containers or frozen before shipped up as well. So we haven't had any odor problems in any of the other facilities, and that's also part of the things that need to be addressed in the applications. And so I don't know, Misha, do you have anything to address, or speak to in terms of how we are addressing this in the permit applications?
Yeah, that will be something that's obviously covered in the initial study mitigated neg deck, which is the California Environmental Quality Act document. We'll be analyzing that, and we'll also be described these processes that Ed and others have discussed in the coastal development permit. I suspect that there'll be conditions on the project that significant odor cannot leave the site, and if it did, which it doesn't seem like it would, that would need to be abated.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. This next question actually was sent to me through email, and that's also a reminder for those of you that are on the phone. You can always send questions via email either now or later. And so the question submitted was, have you decided on which fish species you will be producing? The fishing industry coast-wide is concerned it will be Atlantic salmon.
It's what happens when you apply is, of course, that you need to get a egg import license. There are no facilities in California that can produce sufficient eggs. I think it's fair to say we're looking at steelhead and salmon. Definitely from a market perspective, and to replace imported fish, it makes sense to do salmon. It's also a fish that is has been bred for aquaculture and also RAS to a greater extent. And it's also a matter of what kind of facilities have sufficient supply of eggs, and can we find contingency? We cannot mix salmon and steelhead in the same system, so we need to find suppliers and contingency suppliers that are robust enough to be able to supply enough eggs to this facility. I think no matter what we choose, it will. There is room for both what we're producing and what's being fished locally or on the West Coast. There is approximately 90% of the fresh seafood and also the salmon is imported. But this is a dialogue that we have or will initiate. I have had some conversation with Fish and Wildlife, and we need to initiate that discussion too and see what's available. But personally, I think salmon is a better choice for all parties. I don't think it will be a threat, and that's a dialogue that we need to have, and we have had, and we also need to have with the fishermen. But it depends on what we can get imported, and that comes down to what facilities are would be approved and can supply sufficient health certifications that you need, or certificates that you need to be able to import eggs. And import is anything that's outside. You import from Washington State or British Columbia or Idaho, and so you import from anywhere that's outside of California. So we're not talking, necessarily like from far away. But we have Cahal, he's our production director. He's not here today. He is actually currently working on screening the market and looking at where we can and get access to a good source of eggs and a brood stock and some reliable egg import or egg purchases. So, but it is a dialogue. We don't have a, that's not finished yet. And there are a lot of criteria that needs to go into making that decision and to apply for it and to have the right discussion with the right authorities. So as soon as we have a definite answer, of course, we'll give it out. But at this point, it's not a final decision yet.
So Marianne, a follow-up to that is, what is the timeline for that permit application?
I hope to initiate that dialogue. I mean, everything is, in that sense, is a little delayed due to the COVID. We need to be able to gather a lot of people and also be able to do some travel. I hope as soon as possible. Hopefully we can start initiating this the dialogue this fall. But there are some issues that are delaying us. But hopefully as soon as possible. My intention was to have started this already, last spring. So as soon as possible.
Great, thank you for that. So the next question, and you've addressed this somewhat in talking about the species and the fishermen's maybe thoughts on salmon, but the question is, have you received comments or concerns from local fishermen? And then the other part's about safety tsunami plan, which I believe has been addressed, but if Dan, if that part of your question hasn't been addressed, just repeat it. But again, the first question is, have you received comments or concerns from local fishermen?
Yes, I have had several meetings and we will continue to have several meetings, and we have had discussions and comments, and I think it's fair to say that there are certain things that we agree on, certain things that we, I wouldn't say we disagree. I mean, there's been a good dialogue, and it's been, we've asked, been asked the challenging questions and try to answer as good as we can. Which I think is fair. I mean, it's having a good and also at times challenging dialogue is important. Yes, we have heard concerns. We have heard concerns regarding anything that's not kingfish that we do in Denmark, and that hasn't been really the plan. And I think there's we need to continue to have that dialogue, and we have agreed that it's important to have a dialogue and have open and frank discussions. And I hope we probably have a meeting, in not too long in the future, and to discuss this and this impact more in detail. And as we've said, it's important, and I have heard some concerns. And I guess there are some different, maybe opinions. I think in my, in the way we look at it is that we're not trying to replace any local fisheries. I mean, I think nothing on the West Coast can compare to what you can get and what you can catch in the ocean. But unfortunately, there isn't enough fish in the ocean to feed the growing demand in the US or in other places in the world. And a lot of the fish are flown in from overseas, from Canada and from Europe and New Zealand and Chile into the US. And there are some food security and traceability issues. What we've seen, though, is that with that import, there is, that's what we're kind of targeting. Our business case to provide a more carbon neutral, or not carbon neutral, but with a product with less carbon footprint is to eliminate the air freight. And I have looked at, if you look at projections, what the consumption of salmon would be in the US in 2030, basically the consumption will be about twice as big as today, from about 500,000 tons to 1 million tons. So, and that's not being produced anywhere else. I mean, I think they have reached a ceiling. I know at least in Norway, where I'm from, where they produce quite a lot of fish, the biggest producer in the world. I mean, there are some biological and environmental issues that cap that ceiling or the amount we can produce. So I think you have to find other ways of producing it, and there is a demand for it. And as I've said, and I'd like to be, challenged too, we have no intentions of combating with, the fishermen on market share or price or, and also, as I said, we're producing what we say high quality products, and we want to maintain and get as good as price as possible for it. So it's not in our intention, and it would be a bad business proposition if we dumped the prices when fresh wild caught fish came into the market, because you can never get it back up, if you start discounting a high quality product. So, and I think there's room for both. And I think also consumption patterns are changing. We see that with COVID. Previously, about 2/3 went to the restaurants and the food service market, and 1/3 to retail. That has actually shifted. So we see now that 2/3 go to retail, which gives a lot of opportunities for anyone. And but that dialogue and making sure that we can agree on that we will do anything we can not to harm or destroy their market. That's not our intention. So I think we can coexist, but yes, there are some concerns, and they're valid, and we need to talk about them. So.
Great, thank you for that. So, so I did have a follow-up question just about employee safety. If you could speak just a little more, I know Scott, or maybe this particular person missed when you responded talking about the plan for tsunami for not just fish, but actually keeping the employees safe if something happened out there.
Scott, you want to do that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, like I said, the analysis are still underway and the design isn't final, but we are getting much further into the design. But the intention is to have, a refuge area on the upper floor of the processing and administration building. And that would basically be the muster point, or, the shelter in place location. In the event of a large earthquake, all the employees would move to that area, and it would have additional engineering and mitigation to try to, guarantee everybody's health and safety. And, as a steward of the community, that would certainly be open to any neighboring businesses, or, it's emergency. We care about keeping people safe. So anything we can do, we will. And then, just to the buildings themselves, they're filled with tanks full of water. And the wave height that's been predicted isn't expected to overtop the height of our tanks. So there is some really good engineering synergy there between balancing those forces, that you have a wall of water coming at a building full of tanks of water. So we just need to properly armor in between the tanks and the exterior of the building so that that water moves around the buildings and does not come through any of the buildings.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question, when will you name the general contractor?
We have in Maine, we have a CM, it's Gil Bain. It's a very solid, reputable company. And I anticipate, we haven't decided, that we will go with the same solution in Humboldt, which means that when you have a construction manager or management company, Ed, maybe you can talk to the way that works.
Sure. We chose the construction manager in Maine because we're able to get them involved early in pre-construction and during permitting and have their assistance early. It also helps us with understanding and protecting the company from financial and schedule risks that might be associated with the general contractor. So we're looking at that same solution in California. We haven't made any final decisions, but you know, the intent is that that would be the solution for California as well. Gilbane is involved in helping us at this point. So the CM process seems to be working, and that's the intent for California. As far as if the person asking the question is looking to reach out about work opportunities or bidding opportunities, feel free to email myself or Scott at any time to let us know about your company and interest in the project.
I think, you know, the CM will do the bidding up for the contracts, but we have said and that we'd like to use as much local or many local contractors as possible as subcontractors to basically having a local content clause, you know, to the extent possible. So we can use, you know, local labor. I think, you know, one of the benefits with, you know, a project like this is to, I don't think there's, from what I have seen so far, that there's a contractor that can do the whole job. It's a $500 million job. It's a huge undertaking, but I think there are many qualified companies that could be part of this and be part of a team as a subcontractor, for example. So, it's our expectation that whoever we choose as a general contractor under our CM would also utilize local contractors as well. Do you have anything to add to that, Ed?
No, I was just going to say that's one of the other advantages of the construction manager is it gives everybody better control over how the project is bid out. Utilizing various size companies, large, medium, and small, and that lets you incorporate local companies to a greater extent than otherwise possible. I'll expand it, and Marianne, you may want to chime in because I know Lynette will mention the next question about unions, and the fact there is that this is as Marianne said, this is a large project that's going to be utilizing a lot of labor from the area, and it's also a quality project that demands high quality. So there is going to be union elements to this. We've had discussions on with local unions starting to talk about this. We want to make sure that we employ quality labor. And we want to talk to all parties about that, and union is absolutely part of that picture to find a solution to bring labor to this project to get it completed. Marianne, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
I saw Jeff, you on the I saw your name here, you on the call or in the presentation, and yes, we have some dialogue with the operating engineers locally. I think there's also jobs that will bid out and will be prefabrication of elements. They're probably not going to happen on site, and there will be other opportunities for both union and non-union labor in prefab of some of these elements, and some of them will come from in Maine, we import some from Europe. I think on the West Coast, we have to look at other solutions because of the transportation costs. So if it's something that we produce in California or, you know, closer to the site, there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. But, you know, as Ed said, bottom line is that we need a high quality workforce and as much local as possible. That's the intention. And I think that's good for the community. It's good for us. It's good for being a good corporate citizen in the community to engage as much as the community as possible. But it, you know, it also makes business sense instead of shipping people in from out of state and you know, pay for transportation and cost of living, room and board. So And it's a better solution for everyone. But you might potentially see this project and some wind farms, and you might even experience a labor shortage in Humboldt. So we'll see. But yes, we're a serious employer, and we treat people both with high safety standards and quality and also compensation and benefits. So we want to be a serious employer, and safe. Having a good safety record is important.
Just to add on to that, someone, you mentioned, Marianne, that people can reach out to Ed or to Scott. If both of you gentlemen wouldn't mind putting your emails in the chat so that people can access them that way. And then I will also let people know that they can reach out to me. So if you have my email, I am happy to pass on your information or put you in contact directly to the folks with Nordic. So you don't necessarily, if you're on your phone or something, you can find me, and then I'm happy to connect you as well.
Okay, I mean that's fine. Just keep in mind that we are currently in the permitting process, and we will start eventually I would assume this fall to select a CM. And as soon as we have that, everything will be going through them, and we're not starting to bid anything. There's still a lot of design that needs to go into this before we go out and bid for contractors. So we're talking sometime into the future. Hopefully we can start demolition about a year from now, or 8 to 12 months from now. But that depends on when we receive the permits. When you build a facility like this, it's important to, we don't want to start demolishing the site or putting a lot of effort into engineering and planning before we know that we can actually build it and the conditions. So unless we have clear indications that we will get the permits and there's just some formalities left, you kind of want to not start the huge spending until you know that you can actually move forward. So we're talking sometime into the future. At this point we need to get obtain our permits before we commit to any detailed planning and bidding.
So thank you. I apologize for the pause there. I'm going to capture this in the chat as well. So I received a question via email, and this is along the same lines. And I'm not sure if you're going to have a lot more information than already offered, but just in case, the question is, what is the process for small local contractors to get involved with the demolition or construction part of it?
I think as soon as we select a CM, we will announce that. But as I said, Scott or Ed, I mean, you could always reach out and show your interest, and there will be packages bid out. I don't know if you want to address that more, Ed, how you do that with CM.
Yeah, I think the typical idea is that we may end up with one large prime contractor, but there's a lot of work to be passed around even during the demolition phase, as far as site contracting, material hauling, and so forth, metal work. So there's always opportunities for if there's smaller companies that are interested. There's definitely lots of packages available. Typically, we end up with a couple larger regional firms that maybe handle the majority of the work, because we do need to get a lot of this work done, in a reasonable manner without too many contractors trying to step on each other. But there will be lots of smaller packages. I think a project like this may have 40 to 45 different contractors on site. So lots of opportunities for bidding.
So so another question is there a website to sign up for updates? And thankfully Scott saw that question. And so for folks that may not be tracking the chat, in the chat box is a link to the Nordic Aquafarms news desk. And that news desk often offers new information about the California as well as the Maine project. And then we do have a Facebook page now here specifically dedicated to the Humboldt project, and that link is also in the chat. Or if you are on Facebook, you can just put in the search Nordic Aquafarms Humboldt, and that'll come up. And if you like the page, it doesn't mean specifically, I think you can follow as well. That'll give you a chance to also receive updates and submit questions if you've got them. Also, please know that I am always here. Again, I'm right here in Eureka. And if you've got any questions or concerns, my job is to connect the community with the people from Nordic, and I'm happy to do that. So please feel free to reach out that way as well.
And we do have an office, but unfortunately, we're not. It's not open at this point. But as soon as we're back in business in California in general, we will have an open door policy here as well. So there will be times where you can come in and talk to our staff, and eventually, sometime we will have meetings where we actually go out and meet with people. So there's many ways you can reach out, but at this point we have the Humboldt Nordic, and it goes as Humboldt before Nordic when you search for it. So that's because we have Nordic Aquafarms Maine, and we want to make sure we don't mix them up. So we will post news there as well, and the news desk also has a lot of media articles and some general articles about aquaculture as well. And Lynette, and then Scott's also Scott Thompson, and his email is scott.thompson@nordicaquafarms.com. So that's available. We will post those emails on the Facebook page as well, which is intended to be the more interactive or more, day-to-day, or at least weekly information. So
I want to make sure, I am hoping that I've caught all the questions from the folks. We've still got quite a few folks still on the call. We are approaching 8 o'clock. The people from Nordic on the East Coast are up way past their bedtimes. But I'm going to ask if they don't mind just staying just a couple minutes, just in case we've got some unanswered questions. So if there are people still on the call and your question has not been answered, it's not because I skipped it on purpose. It's just simply because I missed it in the chat. So if you do have a question, a final question or two for the Nordic representatives before they sign off, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll grab it now.
Or, if we answered everything, feel free to unmute and ask it too, if there's anything that.
So there you go. What I'm going to ask is if people want to unmute and ask questions verbally, just if you find yourself talking over someone else, if you wouldn't mind just stopping for a moment, and then I'll just ask one person to speak at a time. So we'll go ahead. So if somebody wants to ask something verbally, Marianne's invited you to.
What do you anticipate the next permit application will be?
Misha, you want to address it? I can start, and then Misha, you can fill in details. We will submit the initial study and the probably late September, early October. We're waiting for some studies to be completed. And the plan is to submit the county coastal development permit application late October, beginning early November, and same with the CEQA documents. Do you have anything to add to that, Misha?
Yeah, that's generally too, depending on how we're progressing on the initial study mitigated neg deck, we may actually submit the coastal development permit to the county a little bit ahead of time. That allows for some time for them to complete some of their processes. They go out for referrals to various agencies. So that sort of depends on how we're progressing on some of the data needs now, which are getting done quickly. And then also we do have to obtain a permit from the Quality Management District for utilization of the generators for emergency power generation. And we're expecting to have data, specific data on the generators over the next few months, and then we'll be submitting that as well.
Well, that's actually true. What we do, what we're doing is that we probably will submit the application to the county incomplete, just to start the process, because they do want to do a third-party review or peer review of some of the studies. So in order to start that process, we need to have a active application or a pending application. So we will submit it before it's finished, just to start the process. And then of course we will submit the complete application in late October, early November. That's the plan. So if there is an incomplete application pending, that's just to start the review process or the independent verification of some of the studies. And we have agreed with the county that they can select which studies they think should need or would need a third-party review. So that's up to them to decide.
I mean, that's an important point I might add to tonight's presentation. Although this was put together by our consultants, we expect that a lot of these studies will be peer reviewed by a hired-in third party by the regulators. So this will be, double checked with all these. So there will be a second opinion put forth for all these aspects that are deemed relatively important and warrant a peer review based on the regulators' opinions.
And that's up to the county. We don't decide which ones. They have the freedom to choose. And also, whoever will peer review them, of course.
Okay, any other, Nordic has now opened it up to verbal questions. Just so it's a little easier to manage at the end of the meeting. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Okay, well, it would be wonderful if we can let these guys go on time. So I want to thank you again, everyone, for coming. And again, if your question was not, if you didn't get a chance to ask, weren't ready to ask your question, but you are still looking for information about this project, feel free, please, to reach out to anyone who has been on this call. We are happy to address any questions or concerns that you have. Really, that's been the wonderful thing for me here locally, is working with Nordic. They want to hear from you. They want to understand what concerns you have, and they want an opportunity to address those. So I don't know if the Nordic team has any closing comments before we officially end it.
No, well, I just want to thank you for coming, and we will stay in touch. We will have, we're entering a phase where we have more, I would say, tangible deliverables and results to communicate. So although we haven't been able to be present in Humboldt, a lot of us for a long time, we are still working on the project and progressing the project, and there will be information coming out. And after we have submitted our applications, late this fall, there will be a normal public hearing process that goes along with the processing the permit applications too. So I think we'll be, you will hear from us more, I would say more frequently going forward. There are a lot more to communicate and questions, that we can answer. If whatever you have of questions, of course, we'll be open to answer those as well. So thank you for coming. And if there's anything that's not been answered, reach out. You can reach out to Lynette and on our Facebook page, or directly to Scott or myself or anyone else in the team. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.